Hiya! Welcome to Pop Not Pop episode 17, and we are sticking with the dance vibes over here as we move on to our next song, which is about wealth, capitalism, and not fitting in. Does this feel relevant to our modern times? I'll let you decide. This song is called Versailles, and it's all about that feeling of failing to outrun yourself. You know, when you think, if I just did this, or said that, or owned this, or travelled there, then I'd be fine / happy. It's almost always nonsense, by the way. Wherever you go, there you are. So, in conclusion, this song is about a complex mixture of feelings, but they are all connected to each other. So, here's the story. I was on a writing holiday in Paris in October 2019, right before the Liminal campaign kicked off. And I made a friend on that trip through the Amanda Palmer network. Long live the Amanda Palmer Patreon. And this new friend actually lived in Versailles, which, as many of you will know, is located just outside of Paris. You have to get a train to get there. I was also dating someone at the time who insisted that I witness the palace at Versailles while I was on this trip. Because, for those who do not know, the histoire française, c'est tout un spectacle. The palace was built by Louis XIV, and that guy liked to spend money and have shiny things. So, anyway, I had a few reasons to go, but on that particular day, for some reason, the direct train was buggered. So I had to take the train all the way around the Wrekin to get there. And by the time I got to Versailles, it was mid-afternoon. So I met my friend, and they gave me a whistle-stop tour around the town. But then they had to go to work. So I pootled over to the palace and, given that it was quite late in the day, decided to just buy a ticket to see the palace grounds. So I got in line and I got my ticket and my map. And you have to bear in mind that by this point I was already quite overwhelmed by the palace itself. Just from the outside, it's very big and gold, and it's kind of like walking into Buckingham Palace, except with no royals actually in residence. So then I got through the barriers and I was in the grounds at the back of the palace. Now, one of the things I like about travelling alone, and one of the reasons I do it frequently, is because it induces self-reflection. And I find that easier to do when I'm geographically removed from my regular spaces. So I'm now faced with the vastness of the palace grounds on my own. And there's nothing like the grounds of a palace to make you feel insignificant. This could be a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes it's useful to shake off the power of your ego, but sometimes it can make you get in touch with a feeling of being lost. The grounds were beautiful and incredibly well kept, so I was drawn into them. And as I moved around these almost over-cultivated spaces, a real sense of surrealism started to set in. So I found myself moving away from all this opulence and finding a bench to sit down on opposite a hedge. Just a hedge. And thinking about wealth and success and my own feelings of futility and what that all meant on a micro and a macro level. And I started to write this song. So here we go. Some things I never had till now. I was just coming off quite a long consulting job at the time, and it was the first time I realised in my life that I had ever been paid a decent wage. A lot of artists have this problem, and it feeds into a particular mentality where low income and self-deprivation become the norm. So when you finally start getting paid even remotely well, you don't necessarily know what to do with that. Hence, it feels like trouble as I soak in the power. This is looking a little bit at how wealth can be quite heady and isn't always good for a sense of reality or priorities. Next, gold leaves. I can see how people go crazy in places like these. Now, I was in Versailles in October and it was still quite warm, but in parts of the palace grounds, some of the leaves on these highly cultivated trees were already on the turn. And the palace is also painted to have this sort of gold glow. So this is a nod to what I could actually see at the time. But using the idea of gold leaf also doubles as an acknowledgement that all wealth is transient. You can't take it with you, and it's no guarantee of anything. Now a bridge. I want to be kind, but I'm in too much pain. I want to believe that people can change. 2019 overall was a bit of an arsewipe in terms of mental health for me. I found myself starting to deal with a lot of painful circumstances that had repercussions for me both personally and professionally. So the bridge is really just alluding to the gap between the person that you want to be and the person that you actually are in the moment, and the acceptance of that. So then it's time for a chorus. And I can see for miles. And yes, I actually could, because the palace grounds are gigantic. But nothing feels right in Versailles. During this time of reflection, the wealth that I was surrounded by made me feel wildly uncomfortable. Now, the feeling of being uncomfortable isn't alien to me, being a communicative but painfully self-aware introvert. But in this case, being raised also in a fairly working class household, I felt like the stuff that I was wrestling with internally was magnified by the environment that I found myself in. I didn't know what to do with myself or how to behave in this place. So then we have, and I'm running for my life, and nothing feels right in Versailles. This describes the dawning realization, starting on that bench and continuing thereafter, of just how much of my life I had spent in survival mode, trying to cope with a lot of circumstances that were outside of my control. Self-examining in this way feels scary and hard a lot of the time, but in reality the fact that I was taking the time to do it voluntarily is actually an indication of recovery, because for the first time I felt like I was beginning to feel safe enough to do that internal work and to seek support, rather than trying to find ways to cope with it on my own. So next we take that emotional muddle and we dance on it. Next week you get to see how. If you enjoyed this foray into my travels / writing process, consider joining the Rookes Lab over at www.patreon.com/IamRookes. For as little as $1 a month. You get early access to Pop Not Pop as well as a plethora of other cool things. But for now, I bid you adieu, and we'll catch you at the next episode of Pop Not Pop.